Hi, boys and girls. This is Santa Claus coming to you from the Billings Library, a wonderful facility that hopefully, if I can get my job done right this Christmas, you'll be able to come see next year for sure. And I'm here to read you some stories. So why don't we get right to it? And we're going to start off with one that's probably familiar to just about everyone. This is How the Grinch Stole Christmas. And of course, it's by Dr. Seuss. I don't know why they put so many extra pages in the front of the book. All right, here we go. Every Who down in Whoville liked Christmas a lot. But the Grinch, who lived just north of Whoville, did not. The Grinch hated Christmas, the whole Christmas season. Now, please don't ask why. No one quite knows the reason. It could be his head wasn't screwed on just right. It could be perhaps that his shoes were too tight. But I think the most likely reason of all may have been that his heart was 2 sizes too small. But whatever the reason, his heart or his shoes, he stood there on Christmas Eve, hating the Whos, staring down from his cave with a sour, grinchy frown at the warm lighted windows below in their town. For he knew every Who down in Whoville beneath was busy now hanging a mistletoe wreath. And they're hanging their stockings, he snarled with a sneer. Tomorrow is Christmas, it's practically here. Then he growled, with his Grinch fingers nervously drumming, I must find some way to stop Christmas from coming. For tomorrow, he knew, all the Who girls and boys would wake bright and early, and they would rush for their toys. And then all the noise, noise. That's one thing he hated, the noise. Then the Whos, young and old, would sit down to a feast. And they'd feast, and they'd feast, and they'd feast. They would feast on Who pudding and rare Who roast beef, which was something the Grinch couldn't stand in the least. And then they'd do something he liked least of all. Every Who down in Whoville, the tall and the small, would stand close together with Christmas bells ringing. They'd stand hand in hand, and the Whos would start singing. They'd sing, and they'd sing, and they'd sing. And the more the Grinch thought of this Who Christmas sing, the more the Grinch thought, I must stop this whole thing. Why, for 53 years, I've put up with it now. I must stop this Christmas from coming. But how? And then he got an idea. An awful idea. The Grinch got a wonderful, awful idea. I know just what to do, the Grinch laughed in his throat, and he made a quick Santa Claus hat and a coat. And he chuckled and clucked, what a great Grinchy trick. With this coat and this hat, I look just like Saint Nick. All I need is a reindeer. The Grinch looked around, but since reindeer are scarce, there was none to be found. Did that stop the old Grinch? No, the Grinch simply said, if I can't find a reindeer, I'll make one instead. So he called his dog Max. Then he took some red thread, and he tied a big horn on the top of his head. Then he loaded some bags and some empty old sacks on a ramshackle sleigh, and he hitched up old Max. Then the Grinch said, giddy up, and the sleigh started down towards the homes where the Whos lay a snooze in their town. All their windows were dark. Quiet snow filled the air. All the Whos were all dreaming sweet dreams without care. When he came to the first little house on the square, this is stop number 1, the old Grinchy Claus hissed, and he climbed to the roof to empty bags in his fist. Then he slid down the chimney, a rather tight pinch. But if Santa can do it, then so could the Grinch. He got stuck only once, for a moment or two, then stuck his head out of the fireplace flue. where the little Who stockings all hung in a row. These stockings, he grinned, are the first things to go. Then he slithered and slunk with a smile most unpleasant around the whole room, and he took every present. Checkerboards, tricycles, popcorn and plums, pop guns and bicycles, roller skates and drums. And he stuffed them in bags. Then the Grinch, very nimbly, stuffed all the bags, one by one, up the chimbley. Then he slunk to the icebox. He took the Who's feast. He took the Who pudding. He took the roast beast. He cleaned out that icebox as quick as a flash. Why, that Grinch even took their last can of Who hash. Then he stuffed all the food up the chimney with glee. And now, grinned the Grinch, I will stuff up the tree. And the Grinch grabbed the tree, and he started to shove, when he heard a small sound like the coo of a dove. He turned around fast and saw a small Who, little Cindy Lou Who was not more than 2. The Grinch had been caught by this tiny Who daughter, who got out of bed for a cup of cold water. She stared at the Grinch and said, "Santa Claus, why? Why are you taking our Christmas tree? Why?" But you know, that old Grinch was so smart and so slick, he thought up a lie, and he thought it up quick. "Why, my sweet little tot," the fake Santa Claus lied, "there's a light on this tree that won't light on one side. So I'm taking it home to my workshop, my dear, and I'll fix it up there and I'll bring it back here." His fib fooled the child, and he patted her head, and he got her a drink and he sent her to bed. When Cindy Lou Who went to bed with her cup, he went to the chimney and stuffed the tree up. Then the last thing he took was the log for their fire, and he went up the chimney himself, the old liar. On their walls he left nothing but hooks and some wire, and the one speck of food that he left in the house was a crumb that was even too small for a mouse. Then he did the same thing to the other Who's houses, leaving crumbs much too small for the other Who's mouses. It was 1/4 dawn, all the Who's still abed, all the Who's still asnore, when he packed up his sled. Packed it up with their presents, the ribbons, the wrappings, the tags and the tinsel, the trimmings, the trappings. 3,000 feet up the side of Mount Crumpet, he rode with his load to the tip-top to dump it. Pooh-pooh to the Who's, he was grinchiously humming. They'll find now that no Christmas is coming. They're just waking up. I know just what they'll do. Their mouths will hang open a minute or two, and then the Who's down in Whoville will all cry boo-hoo. "That's a noise," grinned the Grinch, "that I simply must hear." So he paused, and the Grinch put his hand to his ear. And he did hear a sound rising over the snow. It started in low, and it started to grow. But the sound wasn't sad. Why, this sound sounded merry. It couldn't be so, but it was merry, very. He stared down at Whoville. The Grinch popped his eyes, and then he shook. What he saw was a shocking surprise. The Who down in Whoville, the tall and the small, were singing without any presents at all. He hadn't stopped Christmas from coming. It came. Somehow or other, it came just the same. And the Grinch, with his Grinch feet ice cold in the snow, stood puzzling and puzzling. How could it be so? It came without ribbons. It came without tags. It came without packages, boxes, or bags. And he puzzled 3 hours till his puzzler was sore. And then the Grinch thought of something he hadn't before. Maybe Christmas, he thought, doesn't come from a store. Maybe Christmas, perhaps, means a little bit more. And what happened then? Well, in Whoville, they say that the Grinch's small heart grew 3 sizes that day. And the minute his heart didn't feel quite so tight, he whizzed with his load through the bright morning light, and he brought back the toys and the food for the feast. And he himself, the Grinch, carved the roast beef. Now, if you've seen the movie or movies, it's a little different, but this is the real deal. What's next? Oh, there's another one that's a movie too. The Polar Express. Written and illustrated by Chris Van Allsburg. On Christmas Eve, many years ago, I lay quietly in my bed. I did not rustle the sheets. I breathed slowly and silently. I was listening for a sound a Fred had told me I'd never hear. The ringing bells of Santa's sleigh. There is no Santa, my friend had insisted, but I knew he was wrong. Late that night, I did hear sounds, though not of ringing bells. From outside came the sounds of hissing steam and squeaking metal. I looked through my window and saw a train standing perfectly still in front of my house. It was wrapped in an apron of steam. Snowflakes fell lightly around it. A conductor stood at the open door of one of the cars. He took a large pocket watch from his vest and then looked up at my window. I put on my slippers and robe. I tiptoed downstairs and out the door. "All aboard!" the conductor cried out. I ran up to him. "Well," he said, "are you coming?" "Where?" I asked. "Why, to the North Pole, of course," was his answer. "This is the Polar Express." I took his outstretched hand and he pulled me aboard. The train was filled with other children, all in their pajamas and nightgowns. We sang Christmas carols and ate candies with nougat centers as white as snow. We drank hot cocoa as thick and rich as melted chocolate bars. Outside, the lights of towns and villages flickered in the distance as the Polar Express raced northward. Soon there were no more lights to be seen. We traveled through cold, dark forests where lean wolves roamed and white-tailed rabbits hid from our train as it thundered through the quiet wilderness. We climbed mountains so high it seemed as if we would scrape the moon. But the Polar Express never slowed down. Faster and faster we ran along, rolling over peaks and through valleys like a car on a roller coaster. The mountains turned into hills, the hills to snow-covered plains. We crossed a barren desert of ice, the great polar ice cap. Lights appeared in the distance. They looked like the lights of a strange ocean liner sitting on a frozen sea. "There," said the conductor, "is the North Pole." The North Pole. It was a huge city, standing alone at the top of the world, filled with factories where every Christmas toy was made. At first, they saw no elves. "They're gathering at the center of the city," the conductor told us. "That is where Santa will give the first gift of Christmas." "Who receives the first gift?" we all asked. The conductor answered, "He will choose one of you." "Look," shouted one of the children, "the elves." Outside, we saw hundreds of elves. As our train drew closer to the center of the North Pole, we slowed to a crawl, so crowded were the streets with Santa's helpers. When the Polar Express could go no further, we stopped and the conductor led us outside. We pressed through the crowd to the edge of a large open circle. In front of us stood Santa's sleigh. The reindeer were excited. They pranced and paced, ringing the silver sleigh bells that hung from their harnesses. It was a magical sound like nothing I'd ever heard before. Across the circle, the elves moved apart and Santa Claus appeared. The elves cheered wildly. He marched over to us and, pointing to me, said, "Let's have this fellow here." He jumped into his sleigh. The conductor handed me up. I sat on Santa's knee and he asked, "Now, what would you like for Christmas?" I knew that I could have any gift I could imagine. But the thing I wanted most for Christmas was not inside Santa's bag. What I wanted more than anything was one silver bell from Santa's sleigh. When I asked, Santa smiled. He then gave me a hug and told an elf to cut a bell from a reindeer's harness. The elf tossed it up to Santa. He stood, holding the bell high above him, and called out the first gift of Christmas. A clock struck midnight as the elves roared their approval. Santa handed the bell to me, and I put it in my bathrobe pocket. The conductor helped me down from the sleigh. Santa shouted out the reindeers' names and cracked his whip. His team charged forward and climbed into the air. Santa circled once above us and then disappeared into the dark polar sky. As soon as we were back inside the Polar Express, the other children asked to see the bell. I reached into my pocket, but the only thing I felt was a hole. I had lost the silver bell from Santa's sleigh. "Let's hurry outside and look for it," one of the children said. But the train gave a sudden lurch and started moving. We were on our way home. It broke my heart to lose that bell. When the train reached my house, I sadly left the other children. I stood in my doorway and waved goodbye. The conductor said something from the moving train, but I couldn't hear him. "What?" I yelled out. He cupped his hands around his mouth. "Merry Christmas," he shouted. The Polar Express let out a long blast from its whistle and sped away. On Christmas morning, my little sister Sarah and I opened our presents. When it looked as if everything had been unwrapped, Sarah found one last small box behind the tree. It had my name on it. Inside was the silver bell. There was a note. "Found this on the seat of the sleigh. Fix that hole in your pocket. Signed, Mr. C." I shook the bell. It made the most beautiful sound my sister and I had ever heard. But my mother said, "Oh, that's too bad." "Yes," said my father, "it's broken." When I'd shaken the bell, my parents did not hear a sound. At one time, most of my friends could hear the bell. But as the years passed, it fell silent for all of them. Even Sarah found one Christmas she could no longer hear its sweet sound. Though I've grown old, the bell still rings for me as it does for all who truly believe. Thank you. Okay. A Cobweb Christmas, the tradition of tinsel. Once upon a Christmas time, long ago in Germany, there was a little old woman. She was so little, she had to stand on a stool to climb into bed, and so old she couldn't even count all the Christmases she'd seen. The children in the nearby village called her Tante, which means auntie in German. Tante lived on the edge of a pine forest in a tiny cottage just large enough for her to keep a canary for singing, a cat for purring, and a dog to lie by the fire. Squeezed up against the cottage was a barn. In it, Tante kept a donkey for riding, a goat for milk and cheese. She had a noisy rooster to wake her in the morning, and a speckled hen to lay an egg for her breakfast. With so many animals about, her little cottage wasn't very tidy, but a bit of fur, a few feathers, or a spider web or two didn't bother Tante. Except once a year when the days got short and the nights grew long, the old lady would nod her head and say, "Time to clean for Christmas." Then Tante shook the quilt and scoured the kettle until it shone. She scrubbed the floor with her hands and on her hands and knees and stood tiptoe on her stool to sweep the cobwebs from the rafters. "Shoo," said Tante. She swished her broom and sent every spider and every wisp of web flying out the door. When she cleaned house from corner to corner, the little old woman nodded and said, "Time to fetch Christmas." Tante took an axe from the barn and hung the harness with the bells on the donkey. She scrambled onto its back, and they trotted into the forest. "There," she pointed to a pine tree no bigger than she was. "That one's just right," she told the donkey. Tante chopped down the tree, taking care to leave a bough behind so that it might grow again. Then, bells jingling, they went home, only now the donkey carried the tree on his back and Tante skipped along beside him. The tree fit perfectly in the tiny cottage. The old woman nodded and said, "Time to make Christmas." Tante made cookies for the tree. She baked gingerbread boys and girls. She rolled sugar cookies shaped like new moons and cut cinnamon cookie stars. She rubbed apples until they gleamed like glass to hang from the branches too. Next, she put up a red ribbon on a bone for the dog and tied a sprig of catnip for the cat. Tante scattered the corn for the chickens, the seed for the canary, and she heaped oats into a basket for the donkey and the goat. And then the old woman nodded and said, "Time to share Christmas." Each year, Tante invited the village children to come and see her tree. "Tante," they shouted, "it's the most wonderful tree in the world." "Tell me if it tastes as good as it looks," she said. After the children nibbled the apples and the cookies and ate every crumb of gingerbread, they hurried home to put their shoes by the doors for Kris Kringle. He was the Christmas visitor who went from house to house, tucking gifts into the waiting shoes. Then Tante asked the animals to share Christmas. The dog, the cat, the canary, the hen, the rooster, and some small, shy wild creatures crowded around the tree. The donkey and the goat peered in the doorway. Tante had something for everyone. Everyone except the spiders, because they'd all been brushed away. But no one could give the little old lady what she wanted. All her life, Tante had heard about the marvelous happenings on Christmas Eve. Animals might speak aloud. Bees might hum carols, or cocks crow at midnight. Tante wished she could witness a bit of Christmas magic too. She sighed, sat down in her rocking chair. "Time to wait for Christmas," said the old lady, and she nodded and nodded her head. Tante was so tired from cleaning and cooking that she fell fast asleep. She did not know if the rooster crowed when the clock struck 12, or if the dog whispered secrets to the cat, and she did not hear the squeaky voices calling at her door, "Let us in!" Someone else heard. Kris Kringle was passing the cottage on his way to take toys to the village children. He stopped to listen and saw hundreds of spiders on Tante's doorstep. "We have never shared a Christmas," the biggest spider explained. "Each year Tante sweeps us away. Please, Kris Kringle, would you let us see Tante's tree?" Kris Kringle looked down at the spiders. "There's no harm in that," he said. Before he went to the village, he opened Tante's door a crack. Huge spiders, tiny spiders, smooth spiders, hairy spiders, spotted spiders, striped spiders, brown, black, and yellow spiders, the palest kind of see-through spiders, all came creeping, crawling, sneaking softly, scurrying, hurrying, quickly, lightly, zigging, zagging, weaving, and wobbling into the old woman's cottage. The curious spiders crept closer and closer to Tante's tree. 1, 2, 3 skittered up the trunk, and all the other spiders followed. Silently, they ran from branch to branch, back and forth, up and down the tree. Wherever the spiders went, they left a trail behind. Threads looped from limb to limb, and webs were woven everywhere. Now the busy little spiders had shared Christmas. They had seen and felt every twig on the tree, so they scuttled away. When he had put a gift in all the children's shoes, Kris Kringle returned to latch Tante's door. He peeked inside and discovered her tree was tangled with sticky, stringy cobwebs. He knew how hard the old lady had worked to make Christmas, and how dismayed she'd be when she saw her tree. But he didn't blame the spiders for being curious. Instead, he decided to leave a special gift for Tante too. Gently, Kris Kringle touched each web. Below his finger, the slender strands gleamed like gold, and the dangling threads sparkled silver. Now Tante's Christmas tree was truly the most wonderful in the world. The rooster woke Tante in the morning. The old lady blinked in amazement at her glittering tree. "Something magic has happened," she cried, and she climbed on her stool for a better look. At the top of the tree, she saw one small spider finishing its web. "Ah," Tante nodded her head, "so it's you and your kin I have to thank for this Christmas magic." The little old lady understood that such wonders only happen once. Each Christmas thereafter, she did not clean so carefully, but left a few webs in the rafters so that the spiders might share Christmas too. And every year, after she'd hung the cookies and apples on her tree, she would nod and say, "Time for Christmas magic." And then Tante would weave tinsel among the branches until her tree sparkled with strings of gold and silver, that just as it did that magical cobweb Christmas. And that's where we got tinsel from. Okay, we've got time for a quick one, but I'm not sure if we've got any quick ones left here. We may have to go a little long. Cork and Fuzz, Merry Merry, Holly Holly. Cork was a short muskrat. He liked to think. He liked to think about what he might do each day. He liked to think about flowers, birds, snow, and other beautiful things. Fuzz was a tall possum. He didn't think about his day. He just followed his nose to wherever it led. Let's cut here. We'll kill that because even though it's a big book.
Yeah, and it's okay if you go a little bit long too. We've got a little flexibility in where we're putting these in.
I can probably get through this one in close to 3 minutes.
Okay.
All right. So for our last book, we're going to read a story that actually started way back in the early 1900s. This is called Yes, Virginia, There Is a Santa Claus. And it's based on a letter that a little girl wrote to a newspaper. Some of you are now asking, what's a newspaper? Way back in 1897. In 1897, a young girl wrote to the New York Sun asking whether Santa Claus truly existed. Dear editor, I'm 8 years old. Some of my little friends say there is no Santa Claus. Papa says if you see it in the sun, it's so. Please tell me the truth. Is there a Santa Claus? Virginia O'Hanlon. The paper's response was written by Francis P. Church and appeared in the Sun on September 21st, 1897. Is there a Santa Claus? We take pleasure in answering at once and thus prominently the communication below, expressing at the same time our great gratification that its faithful author is numbered among the friends of the Sun. Virginia, your little friends are wrong. They have been affected by the skepticism of a skeptical age. They do not believe except what they see. They think that nothing can be which is not comprehensible by their little minds. All minds, Virginia, whether they be men's or children's, are little. In this great universe of ours, man is a mere instinct, an ant, in his intellect as compared to the boundless world about him, measured by the intelligence capable of grasping the whole of truth and knowledge. Yes, Virginia, there is a Santa Claus. He exists as certainly as love and generosity and devotion exist. And you know that they abound and give to our life its highest beauty and joy. Alas, how dreary would the world be if there were no Santa Claus. It would be as dreary as if there were no Virginias. There would be no childlike faith then, no poetry, no romance, to make tolerable this existence. We should have no enjoyment except in sense and sight. The eternal light with which childhood fills the world would be extinguished. Not believe in Santa Claus? You might as well not believe in fairies. You might get your papa to hire men to watch in all the chimneys on Christmas Eve to catch Santa Claus. But even if they did not see Santa Claus coming down, what would that prove? Nobody sees Santa Claus, but that is no sign that there is no Santa Claus. Most real things in the world are those that neither children nor men can see. Did you ever see fairies dancing on the lawn? Of course not, but that's not proof that they're not there. Nobody can conceive or imagine all the wonders that are unseen and unseeable in the world. You may tear apart the baby's rattle and see what makes the noise inside, but there is a veil covering the unseen world which not the strongest man or even the united strength of all the strongest men that ever lived could tear apart. Only faith, fancy, poetry, love, romance can push aside that curtain and view the picture, the supernal beauty, and the glory beyond. Is it all real? Ah, Virginia, in all this world there is nothing else real and abiding. No Santa Claus? Thank God he lives, and he lives forever. 1,000 years from now, Virginia, nay, 10 times 10,000 years from now, he will continue to make glad the heart of childhood. Merry Christmas to you all. I look forward to seeing you on Christmas Eve, but of course you won't see me. We would like to thank the Library Foundation for promoting the importance of reading every day, and to remind parents by reading a book a day to your kids, they'll be ready for success when they start kindergarten. Want to have your child ready for school? Sign up for the 1,000 Books Before Kindergarten, made possible by the Library Foundation, and win fun prizes. Information is on the Billings Public Library website.